do is from the betting perspective, you could have somebody who's like 60 to 1 to win, and there's not even a real good way to hedge it because there's like 10 guys that have a chance to win. Good morning, guys. It is the Awesemo NBA strategy show for Saturday slate. I'm here with Adam breaking it down, and only 3 games to talk about. The NBA schedule remains a little bit off because of the NCAA tournament where they didn't want to compete with it on Thursday, so there's only one NBA game. So we're just kind of alternating massive slates, small slates, massive slates, small slates. Adam, which do you prefer? Do you prefer the 12-game slate or the 3-game slate?
I guess I guess 12. Like, I do think 12 gamers are kind of fun just because like you can play more or less whoever you want because ownership's never going to get that out of control. The part of them that sucks is that like there's always going to be multiple random dudes that just go for massive games. But in small field stuff, at least, I think they're pretty fun because a lot of times you don't have to worry about the random dude because they're 0% owned. You get, I guess, more strategy on the 3-gamer, like from an ownership standpoint. But, you know, obviously it's just no matter what you do, you're going to have a lot of overlap typically.
Yeah. And there's nothing worse than there being a 2 or 3 game slate where a random guy who's like 10% owned goes off, who we probably would have projected for like 8 fantasy points. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, look, he's got 30 midway through the third quarter because so-and-so got hurt and got into foul trouble. So also something that happens from time to time on 3-game slates. We're about to break this one. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll say it always seems like it's the 3-game slate where like you'll have somebody where, you know, I don't know, like a Kevin Love type guy where like for the last 3 slates, you're like, oh, well, he has a high ceiling and then he just never gets there. And then it's always the 3-gamer where he's like 20% owned because there's nobody else and he goes for like 50.
Who do you think that player might be today? And it might be a little hard to say right now because there are a bunch of guys who are listed as questionable. But who's the guy that fits that Kevin Love mold that you just mentioned that could be the player that breaks tonight's slate?
Well, I just saw Cleveland plays today, so I think Kevin Love's in the
Kevin Love could be the Kevin Love of the slate. Not a bad call, and I think that is definitely very possible. We're about to break these games down. Do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and without further ado, the first game we have to talk about, it is the Dallas Mavericks at the Charlotte Hornets. Now, starting with the Dallas side of the game, we do have Theo Pinson's questionable. Who cares? Reggie Bullock is doubtful. So Bullock has missed the last couple of games. It's led to extended playing time for Spencer Dinwiddie. Dinwiddie's also kind of been priced up to the expanded role that he's been playing without Reggie Bullock. Is there anything else that you see with the absence of Bullock that still makes sense from a points per dollar perspective?
No, not really. I mean, I think it does open the door for more minutes for Maxi Kleber at 3,900. Dwight Powell, you know, can potentially play a little bit more at 4,600. Good spot for him, but, you know, the salary is increasing as well. And then you just get, you know, Luka, Dinwiddie, Brunson, Finney-Smith playing pretty solid minutes in a good matchup. It is worth noting that both of Dinwiddie and Brunson, as you would expect, lose production when they're sharing the floor with Luka. And then now that they have to share the floor to some extent with each other, I don't think that really does them favors either. But you certainly can still get a good game from time to time from one of those guys at reasonable prices. So I think Luka is very clearly the best play from Dallas. But then, you know, on a 3-game slate, you can certainly make a case for any of Maxey, Powell, Finney-Smith, Brunson, Dinwiddie.
And then relative to the other pay-up options on this slate, where does Luka fit into the picture? Because while there's only 3 games today, we've got the Lakers playing, so there is LeBron on the slate. Those are really the only 2 top tier pay-up options between Luka and LeBron. Then we've got, you know, the second tier, which is LaMelo and Garland. So is this a slate where you think you're going to be spending all the way up to Luka frequently? And who do you prefer between him and LeBron?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably get there a good amount just because like on shorter slates, it's twofold because normally you don't have, well, always, you don't have as many value options to rotate through as you would on a big slate, but raw points end up really mattering too. Like when you talk about a 12-game slate, there's just more guys in that 9K range that can possibly go for 55, 60 DraftKings points. Whereas on a 3-gamer, your options are just limited. And if Luka does something like, you know, even gets 55, 58 DraftKings points, something like that, he's pretty likely to be optimal just given the raw points and the number of, you know, the limited number of options. So I do expect I'll get to a lot of Luka. I expect I'll get to a lot of LeBron as well. I think they look pretty comparable between the two. I think I would give the slight edge to Luka, but LeBron does have an extra position you can play in that.
And then if we're just going to try to stretch out the Mavericks, players that we wouldn't normally consider on something like a 12-game slate, but maybe we would on a 3-game slate just because the options are so limited, amongst the guys like Josh Green, Davis Bertans, anybody else, if we're going deep diving for large field GPPs that you think is worth taking a shot on?
On this team, I think it's pretty tough. I mean, if you look at their rotation yesterday, like Josh Green played 20 minutes. Even Kleba didn't play a lot. He played like 19 and a half minutes. I do think that there's a chance you get more Kleba in this matchup. We had seen him start the second half 2 games ago in place of Dinwiddie. And then last game, Dinwiddie started both halves. But that was a little bit different game. Like you had the front court of Harris and Embiid, maybe with PJ Washington out there alongside Plumlee, maybe you get a little bit more Kleba. But like beyond that, Josh Green played 20 minutes, but Bertans played like 7 or 9. Bertans played 9. Marquise Chris played 7. Nobody off the bench other than Kleba and Green played more than 9 minutes.
All right, so let's move to the Charlotte side. Maybe this is the spot where you can find some deeper GPP value. We won't find it on the injury report, though. The only player who's hurt right now is Gordon Hayward. He hasn't played in forever, so that's not impacting any of the value or pricing for today. But what stands out to you from the Charlotte side of the game? The Dallas Mavericks have had a shockingly good defense this year relative to what we're expecting coming into the year.
Yeah, and a pretty slow-paced team as well. It makes Charlotte not really stand out. I think that they do have they have players that play a lot of minutes. They have players that produce at a high rate when you talk about Ball, Bridges, Rozier, but they're all priced pretty much correctly as well. We've seen LaMelo's playing time, for the most part, take a hit. He did play 36 minutes last game, which was good to see just because we hadn't seen that in a while. He certainly has upside at 8,800, but I think he's pretty close to correctly priced. Same can be said for Bridges and Rozier. You have a pretty cheap price tag on PJ Washington, but the issue with Washington is twofold. For one, you have Jalen McDaniels back, and so that's something that's likely to cut into Washington's playing time a bit. When McDaniels was out, you were getting Washington playing 34, 36 minutes. I don't think that's likely to be the case all that often with McDaniels back. And then the other big issue is that Washington is a much, much more productive DFS option when he's playing center. Now he's playing basically all of his minutes alongside either Plumlee or Montrezl Harrell, so it makes him less productive. I do think it's a pretty good spot for Plumlee at 4,900, but you can only get so excited about Plumlee. He did play 35 minutes last game, which was good to see. Played a little bit alongside Harrell again, which is strange. I don't expect that to be the case going forward, but we have seen that from time to time. I do think it's a good spot for Plumlee, but I also think that his pricing is pretty much correct.
Yeah, and on the point of the Dallas defense and why they've been limiting fantasy points, they're 6th in the league in defensive efficiency, so really good defense. And then they're dead last in the league in pace. We're talking about a good defense that also plays at a slow pace. They've been brutal for teams going up against them for DFS purposes. As a result, I think LaMelo is the weakest pay-up option on the slate when we're talking about the top tier, which is LeBron, Luka, Garland, LaMelo. I think that LaMelo is the least favorable of those 4 plays. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. So the 4 you said were Luka, LeBron, Garland, and LaMelo?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, and it doesn't even mean that on a 3-game slate you can't get to LaMelo. He's just the lowest priority for me of those guys. And then I look at some of these other players too. Miles Bridges is really expensive. Terry Rozier is really expensive. I kind of feel like I'm priced out of playing them in this matchup. And now I'm going to ask you the same thing about Charlotte that I asked you about Dallas. And I think it's a good practice for us on this 3-game slate to go through all of these. Is there anybody you view as a really deep GPP flyer that you would be considering just because it's a 3-game slate?
You could make a case for guys like Trez or Oubre, Cody Martin at 3,600. The reason being, and it's purely a 3-game slate thing. Typically, they're not going to get there, but they are cheap. And especially in the case of Harrell and Oubre, they are good point per minute guys. So if for one reason or another they get more playing time, they're likely to do very well. You need to find a way for them to get more minutes. And that's an issue because, Harrell's playing time has been down. You're typically seeing like 18 to 20 minutes from him. Oubre's playing time has been down into the teens pretty frequently recently. Isaiah Thomas remaining in the rotation hasn't been good for Oubre. Cody Martin and McDaniels coming back hasn't been good for Oubre. But we've seen plenty of games this year where Kelly Oubre has no business being in an optimal lineup, and then he just comes out there, gets hot, and plays 30 minutes because he can't miss. Similarly, last game you did get 25 minutes from Cody Martin. He's 3,600, not the best point per minute guy, but he's really cheap. So I do think that trio can potentially get there. Just, again, very low probability plays. Actually curious to see, looking now at the boom bust tool, for DraftKings, we do have Harrell going a little bit under-owned. Also, for what it's worth, have Plumlee going a little under-owned. Same for Oubre. And then we have Martin being a little bit over-owned. But yeah, I think like Kelly Oubre, 9% chance of being optimal, 6% projected ownership. Harrell, 16% chance of being optimal, 14% projected ownership. So neither guy is someone that is likely to get you there, but they are going a little bit under-owned.
Let's move on to the next game. Lakers and Wizards. This is probably going to be the spot that offers us the most value tonight by the time that the slate starts. The reason being is starting on the Lakers side, we have Wayne Ellington questionable, Taylor Horton-Tucker questionable, and Carmelo Anthony questionable. LeBron James actually not listed on the injury report today. Watch this be the game he gets ruled out. Now they've taken him off the injury report, they'll finally roll him out. But that does offer us, at least in theory, a little bit of peace of mind. So first, let's start with the injuries with Melo. Taylor Horton-Tucker, Wayne Ellington, all questionable. Which wings stand to benefit the most if these guys aren't able to play?
So the caveat here is it's the Lakers, and who the hell knows, because they change up their lineup constantly because everybody on the team is terrible. But if guys are out, we saw Wenyen Gabriel get the start yesterday and played really well when he was out there. Dealt with some foul trouble, then had a brief injury scare, came back, but was just lights out when he was on the floor. He's 3K flat, center only on DraftKings, which is not helpful. But if he's in the starting lineup, I think that's a value piece you can go to because he actually is a pretty decent point per minute fantasy producer, as opposed to when you talk about the other placeholders that they use, like Stanley Johnson or Avery Bradley or Austin Reeves. Like all these guys just suck from a fantasy standpoint. Wenyen Gabriel really doesn't. So I do think Gabriel's interesting if he's in the starting lineup. If he goes back to the bench, I don't have any interest there though.
Yeah, and then I want to ask you about Russell Westbrook next. I saw somebody in chat say that, hey, Westbrook is back. He scored 56 fantasy points yesterday and had a triple-double in an overtime game. Here's his fantasy point totals the games before that: 30, 31, 17, 26. He had one good game. I think it's an outlier, not a sign of things to come. So that's why I didn't even include Westbrook in the same tier as the LaMelo, Garland, Luka, and LeBron players. I know that he's kind of priced similarly to them. He's right around the same salary as LaMelo. But I still just don't consider Westbrook to be that kind of fantasy producer anymore. So do you look at last night's slate as a sign of things to come, or is just, hey, that was a one-off game?
No, I think it goes in both directions. If Westbrook goes out there and has just like a completely awful game and turns the ball over 14 times and doesn't score a point, you're not going to say, oh, Russell Westbrook's never going to score again. And he had a good game. I don't think that it's like some indication that he's suddenly going to play a lot better going forward. I think he is what he is. He still gives you upside because he can rebound. He does get assists. And if he's actually able to make shots, he's a triple-double threat. But yeah, I don't think you can look at one game and conclude that he's back. I did you see his answer post game when the reporter asked him the ridiculous question about his shooting?
No, I didn't. What did he say?
So the reporter asked him like how he maintains his confidence. He was like, because so many of your shots end up being really ugly misses, like the ones that hit the top of the backboard. How do you maintain your confidence when you're playing? And Westbrook just like looked at him for a second and was like, I've scored 23,000 points in this league.
Fair enough. And so Westbrook probably a well-adjusted answer. LeBron did not give a well-adjusted answer to the media yesterday, who, for whatever reason, they're talking about Scotty Barnes in Toronto, and LeBron said he saw Scotty Barnes play in 7th grade and told all his friends that he's going to be a star one day, so he's not surprised. Maybe the weirdest lie I've ever heard a player tell, because it's just blatantly not true, and why would you even say that? But LeBron does have a matchup against the Wizards. He's been playing from a fantasy standpoint pretty well down the stretch of the year because, well, in part, he's not playing on defense anymore. He's kind of just cherry picking on offense. And I'd say like 40 to 50% of possessions, if you're watching the Lakers play, won't even show up on the screen on defense because he doesn't even pass half court. But it's helped him from a fantasy production standpoint. We've seen massive upside. He scored 60 or more fantasy points now in, 4 of their last 7 games, a few of those games over 70 fantasy points. So we talked about the merits of Luka as a pay up option. You said that you do slightly prefer Luka to LeBron, but LeBron obviously still a really strong play on this slate. So any further LeBron analysis you have for this one?
Just pay attention to the ownership between him and Luka. I mean, right now on DraftKings, we have LeBron coming in at 30% with a 26% chance of being in the optimal lineup. We have Luka coming in at 44%, but with a 37% chance of being in the optimal lineup. So it's a situation where like both guys are technically overowned, but they're also going to give you really, really strong lineups. But Luka just likely, projects as much more likely to be in the optimal lineup. So I think I would need a little bit bigger ownership gap than we're getting right now to prioritize LeBron over Luka. Also, I'm not really knocking him for it being a back-to-back, but it is a back-to-back. After they went to overtime, he's been having issues with his knee. There's some non-zero chance that he's less than 100%.
Oh, I definitely don't think LeBron is 100% right now. I think that's the main reason he's been dogging it on defense. Right. And the other thing too is I like making fun of the Lakers. It's fun. It gets their fans very riled up on Twitter, so it drives engagements, which encourages me to do it more because they get so upset when you talk bad about LeBron or this team. But the team's largely been terrible this year. At the same time, these games have no significance to the Lakers. There's about 10 games left in the season. No matter what the Lakers do in those games, they're going to be in the play-in game. They're going to be either the 9 or the 10 seed. They're going to have to win back-to-back games to make the playoffs. They might as well sit LeBron for the final 2 weeks of the season, keep Anthony Davis out, then you bring them back for the play-in game. I think that's another reason this team doesn't really give a shit right now is because they know the games don't have significance. Why is LeBron going to bust his ass on defense when all it's going to do is potentially aggravate an injury and it isn't going to affect the Lakers' standings, long-term and their odds to make the playoffs? So I think that what's going on with the Lakers right now and some of their struggles, a little bit overblown because they're just not all that significant. One other piece that I want to ask you about with Carmelo Anthony and Taylor Horton Tucker, if these guys are in, would you like either of them as options?
I think they'd be okay. I mean, it's a game. I do like the matchup with Washington. Anthony, potentially gets like 26 to 28 minutes at 5K. Horton Tucker, same thing at 4,600. They wouldn't look great to me, but they would certainly be playable. Similarly, if they're out, you're likely to get Dwight Howard back in the starting lineup. Played 24 minutes yesterday. Not a bad spot against this Washington front court. Nice little revenge game for somebody that played like 3 games with the Wizards. So I wouldn't mind getting to him at 4K if he remains in the starting lineup.
Stephen Leibowitz in the YouTube chat said the best LeBron is him talking about how great The Godfather was, and then when asked for his favorite line, he didn't have anything. Is that something that actually happened?
I think so. I've heard that before.
That reminds me, there was an old Norm Macdonald joke about just telling lies for no reason. and his thing was, so, like I'll see my friend out somewhere and I'll be like, hey, did you see the new James Bond movie? And I'll think for a second and they'll say, yes. And that kind of, I feel like that's LeBron's character too, where just people ask him stuff. He's like, yeah, I read. He's bringing books. Remember when he was bringing books with him to press conferences?
He's always on the first page. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
in LeBron's defense, I am horrible at recalling quotes. Like I can tell you, I really like The Godfather. I cannot quote anything from The Godfather or most other movies that I really like.
Yeah, that's well and good, but it does seem like LeBron tells these lies that he's nothing to gain from ever.
Well, so somebody said, how do you know he's lying about Scotty Barnes? You don't. I mean, guys play AAU, like NBA players are affiliated with AAU teams. It's entirely possible he actually did see Scotty Barnes when he was in 7th grade. It's just that like LeBron says so many things so consistently that like are just sketchy as hell that you kind of just like assume that none of them are true.
I think it's just what happens when you have so many yes men around you that nobody go like, hey, LeBron, you're kind of full of shit. Right. And so he's just like, I could say whatever I want. Nobody cares. But it's also just weird.
And it is entirely possible that it's true. Like I know like Bradley Beal, like Darius Garland played on Bradley Beal's like AAU team. And so did I think a couple of other guys. So like they do know these like top tier, middle school, high school talents, but it's also LeBron. So who knows?
Yeah, I'm going to say it's probably false, but whatever. I guess it doesn't matter all that much. We'll move on to the other side of the game. And we have to start by talking about Kristaps Porzingis because apparently Washington says there's going to be a time where they start playing him in back-to-backs. Well, we're almost at the end of the season. So if not now, then never. He hasn't been ruled out. But what are you expecting from Porzingis? First, whether will he play or not? But then number 2, if he does play, is it going to be limited minutes? Is it going to be full minutes? What's going to be the situation there?
Yeah, I mean, my assumption for now is that he doesn't play, but like you said, he hasn't been ruled out, so who knows? If he does play, I expect you'll get around 28, 29 minutes from him. He played about 29 yesterday. It would be weird to me for them to like substantially limit him more than they already are, but play him. Like, I assume they're either playing him or they're not. If he plays, I'm not giving him like 24 minutes or something. I think he plays, his full 28 to 29. And at 7,500, he'd look pretty good here. I mean, he's a 1.4 fantasy point per minute guy, give or take. It's a good matchup against the Lakers. So if he's in, I like him.
I've really liked getting or the idea of Kristaps Porzingis since he came to Washington. He has a usage rate of nearly 30% since he got traded here. And there just aren't players that can be with him for usage with Bradley Beal out. The only drawback has been the minutes haven't been there. But there's been different reasons the minutes haven't been there. For starters, he was coming back from a knee injury, so they were kind of slow to bring him along. And then the last couple of games, so yesterday, for instance, he picked up 5 personal fouls. He gets into foul trouble. That limits his ability to play extended minutes. He ends up with 29. The game before he played 23, but the game was one-sided. It was a blowout. They lost by 20 points to the Denver Nuggets. I don't know if this is going to be the spot since the tail end of a back-to-back. One of these games, though, Kristaps Porzingis is going to be low-owned, and he's going to play 32 minutes with a 35% usage rate, and then he's just going to be a popular play the rest of the season, and his salary is going to start to go up. So
yeah, I said the same thing to Lofty on the deeper dive yesterday. When you go back through, it's really difficult. Like normally when guys are on minutes restrictions, you can get some sort of like consistency where you look and you say like, okay, he's playing 26 minutes every game, or okay, he went 24, 26, 27, 28, like he's trending in the right direction. Washington's been in so many weird spots where he's in foul trouble or the game is a blowout. Like you can't actually look at it and know for sure what they're doing. So I think the most likely case if he plays is 28 to 29, but I think you're right. If the game is competitive and he avoids foul trouble, there's a greater than 0% chance that he's just like not really on a minutes restriction.
Yeah, and here are his games since coming to Washington. First game, he's coming back from injury after a really long layoff. Second game, foul trouble, 5 personal fouls, plays 26 minutes. Next game, blowout against the Lakers. He plays 26 minutes. Game after that, Warriors, blowout. He plays 28 minutes. Then against the Nuggets, blowout. He plays 23. Then last night, foul trouble again. So there's kind of reasons to point to his minutes and be like, yeah, well, I guess he could have played over 30. We'll never know what the Wizards' actual plans were for this game, but it's coming. It's going to happen. So it's something to keep in mind if we find out that he doesn't have any kind of minutes restriction tonight. If he doesn't end up playing, who are the big men that would benefit the most from Washington?
So I think that you would get a little bit more Gafford. Let me find that last game that he didn't play.
Yeah, it was against it was the 12th against the Portland Trailblazers. We got 23 minutes out of Thomas Bryant and only 15 out of Daniel Gafford in the start.
Yeah, so weird rotation where Gafford started but just played a stint in the first and the third. So yeah, I assume Bryant would get back in the rotation. Rui potentially plays a little bit more. Wouldn't shock. I mean, they could start Rui too. Like I'd mentioned it before, but like Unseld was asked about starting him, and he kind of was non-committal. Just like we'll see. It's not a bad idea, but I like his current role. Wouldn't be shocking if they threw him out there if Porzingis is out, but one way or the other, I think it does open the door for more minutes for Rui at 3,600, probably more minutes for Avdia at 3,700 as a trickle-down effect. $3,600 Bryant probably gets back in the rotation, and you can certainly gamble on Daniel Gafford as well, even though his rotation sucked the last time. So it would just open up Washington already. Like even if Porzingis is in, guys like Avdia and Rui and Kispert and Ish and Neto, they're all just guys you can sort of gamble on a 3-game slate and hope that they play 28 minutes at these cheap price tags. If Porzingis is out, it just makes the chances of that happening a little bit higher. And it also opens up Kyle Kuzma, who has lost a few minutes per game since Porzingis came. Not surprisingly, he's lost a little bit of usage as well. I think he looks fine at 8K if Porzingis is in. I think Kuzma looks great if Porzingis is out.
And then I want to ask you about Denny because he's going to be pretty popular today on both FanDuel and DraftKings, more so on DK where he's 3,700, but still 4,400 on FanDuel is a relatively cheap price. Do you think the ownership on him is warranted? Because he's going to be nearly 40% of lineups on DK.
On Avdia?
Yeah, Denny.
Yeah, it's. I mean, with it being a 3-game slate, I understand why he's getting so much ownership. That 40% number might be a bit aggressive. But we have him with a 30% chance of being in the optimal lineup. I do think it's worth noting that if you can find the $1,400, we actually have KCP going a little bit under-owned as opposed to Avdia being over-owned. Kispert's ownership is more in line with his chances of being optimal. Same goes for Neto. So I do think that, you can, if you need to save some ownership, you can pivot to guys like Kispert or Neto or Rui.
Yeah, ultimately, we're going to need an update on Kristaps Porzingis here because he's had such a big usage rate for this team that whether he's in or out is going to have a pretty big trickle-down effect on everybody else. Are there any other talking points for you from the Washington side of this game?
I think rules are important with Washington, and rules in general on a 3-game slate are less important because the opportunity cost of a roster position isn't as high. But you still aren't going to want, more than one of like Gafford or Bryant in a lineup together. You're not going to want more than one of Neto or Smith, most likely. I'd be kind of hesitant to go more than one of like Avdia Kispert or maybe like max 2 Avdia Rui Kispert, something like that. So I do think with a team like Washington where there's a lot of cheap pieces and a lot of volatility in the playing time and rotations, that groups become a little bit more important.
If you guys haven't checked out our premium betting subscription, now is the time. Click the link below to subscribe to our premium betting picks Discord. I don't know why that's hard to say, but premium betting picks Discord. I guess it's a lot of hard consonants at the same time. We've got Alex, Ben Raza, Steve Buzzard, all giving out picks in there. Very low price, and it pays for itself because they're giving out winning picks. So if you guys pay for the package, join the Discord, place the bets on the things that they give out, then it just kind of pays for itself. We've got a lot of sports going on right now. Obviously, NBA, we've got the NCAA tournament going on right now. Also, NBA playoffs are going to be here soon. Baseball starts in just a few weeks. So lots of things that we're going to be able to put some money on. And of course, prop betting that's available in, I don't know how many states now, but probably more than half the country and hopefully everywhere soon. So check that out. Use the link in the description box below. Final game on the slate to hit on. Goes fast when it's only a 3-game slate. We have the Detroit Pistons playing against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, starting on the Detroit side of the game, difficult matchup against Cleveland, but a lot of difficult matchups on this slate. We have Cade Cunningham off the injury report. He missed the last couple of games, but we still have Killian Hayes questionable. He left last games early. I thought it might have been a concussion, but whatever it was a head injury. He's listed as questionable on the injury report. Killian Hayes being out shouldn't be significant, but on a 3-game slate, it could hold some importance to us. If he doesn't play, is there anybody you see really stepping up and becoming a better option?
So you could certainly see more minutes for Corey Joseph if Hayes doesn't play. Joseph ended up playing about 31 minutes last game. Obviously they didn't have Cunningham either. Hayes played the first quarter, and then never came back. But you could see more playing time for Joseph because Diallo is also out, which matters. So at 4,700, it's still not a great price tag for Corey Joseph, but I would expect his playing time to increase if Hayes is out.
Yeah, and from Corey Joseph, he's not the best points from a fantasy producer. It's a difficult matchup against Cleveland. But if we're going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 minutes from him, then I think we could expect mid-20s fantasy points. Would we care about this on a large slate? No, but it's a 3-game slate. And as a starter this year, 28 minutes per game, 20.3 fantasy points in those starts for Corey Joseph. And at his salary, if we're going to project him for, 25 fantasy points, it kind of makes him somewhat appealing at 4,700. So I think that is certainly sensible.
It is worth noting that his rates take a huge hit playing alongside Cunningham too, though.
Yeah. And then speaking of Cunningham, with him coming back from illness, any kind of reservations with rostering him, or how do you feel about him at his salary in this matchup? He did miss the last couple of games. Yeah,
I'm not overly concerned about it. It wasn't an injury. And he was playing huge minutes before he missed those games. Right now, we have him with about a 28% projected ownership, 26% chance of being optimal. He has shooting guard, small forward eligibility on DraftKings, which is useful. Like, you can get him into a lot of lineup spots. The matchup is difficult, like you said, but certainly a very high ceiling for somebody that, if this game's competitive, can play 36 plus minutes.
Yeah, and the price tag at first glance maybe seems a little high for this matchup. He is a little bit cheaper than guys like LaMelo Ball, Darius Garland, Russell Westbrook. There is a salary tier down for Cade. Do you find him to be appropriately priced, underpriced, a little bit overpriced? He is $8,300 over on DraftKings. Only 75 on FanDuel, though, where he's expected to be very, very popular.
Yeah, I think he's underpriced on FanDuel. I think he's pretty much correctly priced on DraftKings. But to the point that you were making, I haven't built lineups yet, obviously, but I think there's a good chance that he just ends up being a very useful piece because of the multi-position eligibility and the fact that he is a little bit cheaper than guys like Garland and LaMelo. It wouldn't surprise me at all if you're building lineups and it's just like, oh, well, I prefer Garland, but I also need a small forward and I don't have an extra $800, so Cunningham it is. I just think that there's a pretty good chance he ends up being a really useful piece in roster construction.
One player that's expected to be really popular from this team is Saddiq Bey. He's coming off a 50-point game, and it seems like everybody scores 50 points on some slate these days. But Saddiq Bey, $6,800 on DK, projected for 24% ownership. Over on FanDuel, Saddiq Bey is $5,600, projected for 39% ownership. I do think some of those numbers are going to be inflated just because of the recency bias. With Cade Cunningham coming back, there's obviously less usage to go to him. What do you make of the ownership on Saddiq Bey? Because I do think that he should regress with Cade Cunningham being back, and people are going to flock to roster him just because of what he did last game.
Yeah, and was Grant out last game too? Or is Add More Funds messed up? Grant
was out last game as well. Yes, he didn't.
Okay,
play
I wasn't entirely sure because they didn't have him playing, but they also didn't have him listed as a DNP. So I was like, not really sure. Yeah, so I mean that impacts it as well. Like that was a game where one, they were playing the Magic and not the Cavs, and two, you're playing without Jeremy Grant and without Cade Cunningham. Saddiq Bey can still have big games. Like he has done it enough this year where it's gotten really annoying because he never really projects for it. I never get there, and then he's always popular enough that when he goes off, you can't win without him. But like he had a 34.7% usage rate in 39 minutes last game. He could play a lot of minutes again, but I feel pretty comfortable saying he's not going to have a 35% usage rate.
Yeah, I just think particularly on DraftKings where he's 6,800, the price on FanDuel is cheap enough, and because of positionality, whatever, it's kind of hard to avoid him. I don't think it's that hard to get away from him at $6,800 on DraftKings with Jeremy Grant and Cade Cunningham back in the mix. And also that last showdown slate, probably the worst NBA slate of all time. I don't know if you ended up building lines for. I came in first place and lost 60% of my entry fees because everybody came in first place.
No, I think I'd been at the bar for 4 hours by the time tip happened.
Oh yeah, it was no fun at all. But yeah, Saddiq Bey, I think he's a fine guy to pivot off of. Probably my favorite play to get to on Detroit is Isaiah Stewart. Just because this is a matchup against Cleveland. Cleveland tends to play some bigger lineups. So I think we could see extended minutes from Isaiah Stewart just from that. Something else also, Isaiah Stewart, he missed time with a knee injury. He misses, about 2 weeks or so, maybe a week and a half, comes back, plays 22 minutes. He played 30 minutes last game. I know there was no Cade Cunningham. I know there was no Jeremy Grant. But even with these guys healthy earlier in the season, we saw games where Isaiah Stewart would play 30 plus minutes. His playing time is all over the place, but just the upside for him at a relatively cheap price point. I like the logic in getting to Isaiah Stewart in tournaments just for the upside purposes. How do you feel about him today?
Yeah, so I think at his price tag, like even if he gets 25, 26 minutes, he could be fine. The big concern I have is that Bagley being on Detroit now does make it difficult, I think, for him to play a lot of minutes unless Detroit starts kicking Kelly Olynyk out of the rotation. But they haven't done that yet. You keep getting, mid-teens in minutes from Olynyk, which unless you're going to really cut Bagley's minutes, I think makes it difficult because for the most part, they're just playing Grant, Bagley, Olynyk, and Stewart at 2 lineup spots. And so it makes it tough, I think, with Grant back to expect 30 plus from Stewart. But he's cheap enough where, he can have a game even in 26 minutes or so.
Do you have any interest in those end of the bench big men? Because I assume Marvin Bagley is going to return to a reserve role with Cunningham and Grant back. That remains to be seen. But I think the starting lineup for today is probably going to be Joseph, Cunningham, Bey, Grant, and Stewart, with Bagley heading back to the bench. If that is the case, what would you make of Bagley and Olynyk, or do you think the starting lineup will look different?
No, that's my expectation for the starting lineup, and it would make it so, Bagley just becomes really difficult to get to because he's priced up now to 6,200. If you assume he's playing like 24, 25 minutes, it's tough to get there. Olynyk, I would assume, is playing like 16 minutes or somewhere in there. At 4,300, though, he could have a game. Like he definitely fits the criteria, as far as 3-game, prayer type plays, because he is a good point per minute guy. But I do think that he's kind of buried behind Bagley and Stewart in the rotation at this point.
Any other talking points for you from Detroit? I feel like we've kind of covered everybody now.
No. Yeah, if Yeah, that's it. Like I was gonna say, if for some reason guys end up missing that we're not expecting, Isaiah Livers has been getting some solid run. He's 3,300, but with Cunningham being probable and Grant being back, I have a hard time figuring out who would be sitting that Livers becomes a play.
Saturday's NBA strategy show is sponsored by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. If you guys have not signed up for Yahoo yet, you can do using the link in the description box below. And if you head on over to Yahoo, make a deposit, enter a contest, you get yourself 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum, get access to all the tools that we have, not just for NBA, but basically every single DFS sport out there. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. Let's look at the Cleveland side of the game, and then we'll be done with the slate because there's only 3 games. And
go back to Dallas real quick.
You want to go back to Dallas?
Dinwiddie's out.
Oh, wow. I didn't even see that. There we go. Yeah. Spencer Dinwiddie out. Reggie Bullock not listed on the injury report. So let's go to Dallas. I missed that came apart. I wasn't looking at my phone for news at 10:30 a.m. in the morning. But here's how the NBA works. They always give us content when we're not expecting it. So we kind of throw out everything we said about Dallas before and just rerun it now with Dinwiddie out of the picture. And here's my initial thoughts. Jalen Brunson, there's extra minutes for him. Reggie Bullock has now gone from doubtful to not on the injury report, and Dinwiddie's gone from not on the injury report to out. So there should be extra usage available for Luka. We already liked him anyway, though, as a top pay-up option. I think this puts a little bit of a gap between him and LeBron, though. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's a benefit for Luka. I think it's a benefit for Brunson. And I would agree that this does kind of widen the gap between Luka and LeBron. Bullock at 4,500 is certainly playable. You're never going to be excited about it, but he does have shooting guard, small forward eligibility. Assuming he replaces Dinwiddie in the starting lineup, you're likely to get 30 plus minutes from him. My initial thought when I saw Dinwiddie was out was that it solidified Kleber's minutes, but now with Bullock back, that's not necessarily the case. But again, I still think Kleber at 3,900 is a good value.
Yeah, and is there anything else here that changes? Because I don't know that there's any value. Like we liked Kleber before. I don't think that this makes me feel any differently about him because Reggie Bullock's just going to play the Dinwiddie minutes. He's not as good of a fantasy producer as Dinwiddie, obviously, but I think more of that usage is going to like a Luka and Brunson than it is to a Maxey or Dorian Finney-Smith per se.
Yeah, I agree. Like my thoughts on Maxey are basically the same. You're just replacing Dinwiddie's minutes with Bullock's most likely, and then whether Maxey gets 20 minutes or 26 minutes is going to depend on for one, whether or not Powell's in foul trouble, and for two, just what Dallas wants to do in this matchup size-wise. So there is some volatility there, but it doesn't really change my projection there. The only players where I think it really changes a lot is Luka and Brunson, because you are talking about someone in Dinwiddie that is a higher usage guy and a more of a playmaking threat than Bullock is.
Anything else you want to talk about from Dallas? And just to reiterate for you guys right there, Reggie Bullock was doubtful. He's now not on the injury report. Spencer Dinwiddie, who was not on the injury report, is now out because of injury recovery. Anything else from Dallas we want to talk on before we hit on Cleveland and wrap this up?
No, I think we can go to Cleveland.
All right. So the Cleveland Cavaliers, they have players on the injury report. Dean Wade questionable, Rajon Rondo questionable. Neither of them big names, but they do play a piece in the rotation. If they're out just because it's a 3-game slate, is there anybody you would be looking at as, oh, here's a cheap guy I'm interested in that I wouldn't have been interested in if they were in?
Who was the second one? Rondo
and Dean Wade.
Oh, okay. Not really. Like we've seen Lamar Stevens starting in place of Wade. He's 3K flat on a 3-game slate. Like maybe you want to roll the dice there, but it's not like he's playing a lot of minutes typically. So yeah, not a whole lot for me to say there. He played 20 minutes yesterday. I expect similar playing time if he starts in place of Wade today. Rondo, I don't really care at all. Like Brandon Goodwin's playing 10, 11 minutes behind Darius Garland. If Rondo were in at 3,900, I assume he's pretty much just backing up Garland as well.
We've seen 11 starts from Lamar Stevens this year. He's averaging 22 minutes and 17 fantasy points in those starts. Hard to expect much from him in terms of big minutes or fantasy points per minute while he's on the court. So low priority play at the flat min. I think that if you absolutely need to save salary, here's the path where Lamar Stevens lands in an optimal lineup. He scores 15 fantasy points in a start, and Luke and LeBron both go for like 70. If you're playing Lamar Stevens, it's not because you like Lamar Stevens, it's because you really like LeBron and Luka. That's right. The reason I see to get to Lamar Stevens. Does that line of logic kind of work with you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like you're not expecting much of anything out of Stevens. It's just a matter of like if Luka and or LeBron both go nuts, like you're not going to need a really good game from the 3K piece. It's just going to be like, oh, I got both of LeBron and Luka.
Then on the high end, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, I think both of them are pretty solid pay-up options. No Jared Allen has opened up a lot in terms of playing time for Evan Mobley. Karis LeVert is back in the picture for Cleveland, although he's playing somewhat limited minutes. But talking about these high-end guys, Garland, Mobley, LeVert, how high of priorities are they for you on the slate?
I think Garland and Mobley both look good. Mobley's rebounding percentage is up without Allen, as you would expect. Good matchup here against Detroit. Usage rate, I think, goes up a little bit without Allen as well, just playing closer to the basket. And then Garland, we know, is just doing everything for this team. Also, wouldn't be shocked if LeVert sits today, in which case Garland would look even better. But I am curious about LeVert's playing time because they had pretty strictly limited him to like 25 minutes. Then yesterday he played like 25 in regulation, but they let him play overtime. So he got up to 29, 30 minutes. I don't know if they just go back to 25 or if they say like, okay, cool, you can play 30 now. Because if you get 30 minutes from LeVert at 6,600, that ends up being somewhat appealing.
Yep, I agree. And it's one of those things that I think we'll need a little bit more news on. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the deeper dive live before lock later today. We should have a better sense of what LeVert, whether he's in or out, and what his playing time is going to look like, of course, as well as all the other guys that are listed as questionable on the slate. Rounding out the Cleveland Cavaliers, we've got Lauri Markkanen and Kevin Love in the front court. Hard to prioritize either one of them, but at the same time, there's reason to think there's upside. So I think they're worth some shares over the course of mass entering lineups. Love versus Markkanen, where do you stand on these guys?
Yeah, I agree with you. The one thing that jumps out to me looking at the boom bust tool is that once again, Kevin Love's not projected for much ownership, and he does have a decent chance of success, 17% chance of being in the optimal lineup, about 8% projected ownership. Markkanen, 24% chance, 23% chance of being optimal, 27% projected ownership. So, Love the lower probability play, but if he continues to not get much ownership, I like going there in tournaments just because you kind of just have to embrace that there's a ton of volatility in his playing time. And while that means a lot of times he's going to just kill your lineups, it also means that the ownership on him is going to be lower than it would be if people could be confident in him. And it just makes it a little bit easier for him to help you win a tournament. Also, Isaac Okoro, never somebody that's exciting to roster, but only $4,000 playing like 33 minutes or so. He's projected for about 18% ownership with a 20% chance of being optimal. So going a little bit under owned as well.
All right. I think that's going to wrap it up for us today. It was only a 3-game slate. There's going to be more content. Oddly, a lot of injury news to look at for this one. So check out the deeper dive live before lock later in the day. It's going to be important that we get all of the latest news. Guys are going to be breaking it down. Check that out. Guys, have a great weekend. Enjoy your Saturday, enjoy your Sunday, and enjoy the NCAA tournament, assuming your bracket isn't busted, which it probably is. But if not, check out our Premium Bets Discord because that's another good way to get some NCAA action.